Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, the material this time is speech perception. In speech perception, there is categorical perception. So, today I will be explain about categorical perception according to my understanding. So, what is categorical perception? Categorical perception is one of the important characteristics of speech perception. It allows us to distinguish between sounds, no matter how varied of similar they may be. And this occurs when a wide range of acoustic cues results in the perception of a limited number of sound categories. An example of this comes from experiments on voice answer time, or VOT, time delay between when a sound starts and when voicing begins. Stimuli are DA, or VOT of 17 milliseconds, or 0.017, and TA, or VOT of 91 milliseconds, or 0.091 millisecond. Okay, next. Despite the continuous variation of VOT, we only hear one phoneme or the other. This is an example to voice answer time, DA and STA. Okay, next. Voice answer time, or VOT, delay between when the sound begins on the onset of vocal cords, distinguishes between TA versus TA and PA versus PA. They sound the same at first glance, but what distinguishes them is a fraction of millisecond. I think enough from me. Lebih dan kurangnya mohon dimaafkan. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Buat kalian yang pengen lihat video penjelasan lebih detail, you can see this video.
Alright, so one place where languages vary quite a bit, which is a pretty interesting and easy thing to look at in terms of their phonetics and phonology, is in this variable called voice onset time. Now this has to do with plosives, so things like TD, G, K, PB, and it has to do with how far after the point where you release the plosive, where you release the closure in the plosive, does your voice start making the vowel sound? So if you have the syllable ta, how long do you have between when you let go of the T closure, where you have your tongue touch to your alveolar ridge, and when you start pronouncing that vowel? You have at one end of the spectrum something that's clearly aspirated. This has a long voice onset time, a long positive voice onset time. This is called a positive voice onset time, just because of how we measure it. This is called a positive voice onset time. And at the other end, you have things that are called pre-voiced, and these have a negative voice onset time. Now, in an aspirated stop, the voicing starts way after the stop is released, and in a pre-voice stop, it starts even before you release the stop. So when you make a T sound, the result is that you get silence, right? So if you've closed off everything and are not voicing anything, you have silence for a second, right? So if you're thinking of this as the acoustic signal, you have this period of silence. So this is the closure. This is while you have no sound, no airs flowing through. And then you get this point, which is called the release. And that's where you start to get that hissy sound, right? Is at that point of release. And then eventually you get to a place where you have the vowel sound, right? The vowel sound is starting up, right? This period in here is your VOT, your voice onset time. In a pre-voiced sound, you have the closure, but the closure is here. And you can see it's not silent during the closure. And usually when you look at acoustic signals, you get this weird like single line, very wiggly single line. That's what it looks like on a if you're looking at the acoustic signature. And then you get the release. And right after that, there's no hissiness like we saw up here, right? So there's this weird sort of low-level hissiness, and here it goes straight into vowel sound, this louder sound that signals that it's a vowel, right? So this is your voice onset time here, right? So see how here it's on the right side of the release, and here it's on the left side of the release. That's why this one's a positive, and this one is a negative voice onset time. Now we have this area in between something that is clearly aspirated and something that is clearly pre-voiced, and these are what we call like regular T's and D's. And language to language, what we call a T that's somewhere in between here and here usually, and what we call a D is somewhere in between here and here, right? It's usually somewhere around here. This is a 0 voice onset time, right? So you can see here's the closure, but we've got none of the hissy stuff, right? So our closure and our release, and the voice onset are both together right there, and so it's a 0 VOT. And a 0 VOT is usually a D, but it can be a T depending on the language and how that language is treating it. So one interesting thing to look at cross-linguistically is where is the voice onset time. Now, one thing that you guys may all be familiar with is that part of having a Spanish accent, an accent of somebody who's a native Spanish speaker, is you have the T's sound weird. And the reason for that is that when you're growing up a Spanish speaker, your voice onset time for a T is closer to this one, is closer to a 0 VOT than it is to this, whereas a native English speaker has a voice onset time closer to this. And it's very hard to relearn that, and so that's why you have those differences. So this is an interesting thing to measure if you're trying to compare different languages.